Can an unknown baker shake an entire corporation with nothing more than a forgotten recipe? Do you have proof, or is this just another sob story from a broke little baker? The manager's voice rang out clearly across the silent conference room, each word slicing through the air like a knife. Maya Quinn stood still, flour dust still clinging to her fingers, her eyes fixed on the sheet of paper in her hands, a printed copy of the sourdough recipe her brother had submitted to the company 8 years ago. She didn't speak, simply stared back at the man who had just sneered at her, his grin smug as if he had just exposed a bad joke. "Who do you think they'll believe, me or some no-name cook like you?" he added, folding his arms and leaning back in his leather chair, convinced the victory was his. No one in the room noticed the young man quietly standing in the corner, the new intern from the coordination department. But his silence wasn't from fear, it was calculated. Because within minutes of stepping out of that room, that so-called intern, Gabriel Stone, CEO of Rosewood Bakehouse, would set off a chain of events that would shake the entire company. That insult, that faded printout, and Maya's gaze, not trembling, not rebellious, just calm to the point of being ice cold, had stirred something deep within him. And that something could no longer be ignored, not this time. There are moments in life when one cannot turn away, cannot stay silent, cannot pretend not to see. For Gabriel, that moment was watching a woman, who had quietly kept the bakery running for 8 years, be judged not for her skill, but for her social standing. From that moment, everything began to shift, from contracts to titles to who would still have a job the next morning. And later, when people spoke of the transformation of Rosewood Bakehouse, they would begin with that very day, the day a rejected recipe carried the truth, and a silent baker stood her ground for something an entire system tried to forget. Gabriel Stone stared into the mirror of a dim motel room, where the faded yellow light cast a glow over the patchy salt and pepper stubble on his face. The elegant suit and Italian leather shoes he once wore while speaking before the board of directors now rested neatly in the closet of a luxury apartment back in San Francisco. In their place were a faded hoodie, a pair of thrift store jeans, and a low-pulled baseball cap. He gave a slight nod, repeating the unfamiliar name to himself like stepping into an old yet distant role. "Ethan Hale, ready for your first shift at Rosewood Bakehouse?" A brief smile flickered across his face, half nostalgic, half bitter. 15 years ago, Gabriel had walked into a bank with a mortgage loan application to open his first bakery. Back then, he had nothing but a pair of hands that knew dough, one of his mother's old cake recipes, and a burning desire to build something that mattered. He used to sleep on flour sacks, wash every baking tray by hand, and mop the floor himself late into the night. Now, after 37 locations, his name appeared on Forbes' list of most inspirational leaders. But because of that, he no longer dared set foot into the shops he had built. Everywhere he went came with familiar glances, scripted questions, and rehearsed flattery. So he chose Seattle, home to the branch dubbed a Yelp darling, where everything appeared perfect until the numbers told a different story. Revenue was down, staffing costs had spiked unexpectedly, and a slew of irregular patterns emerged. He had hired consultants, data analysts, even a customer experience audit firm, but no one could explain why the most beloved bakery was operating at a loss. His father once said something simple yet weighty: "If you want to know why the bread doesn't smell right, you have to put your hands in the dough." And now, that's exactly what he was about to do. Gabriel slung his backpack over his shoulder and stepped out into the spring morning mist of Seattle. The air was cold, still, and rich with the damp scent of soil. He drove a cheap rental sedan and parked 2 blocks from the shop. From the outside, Rosewood Bakehouse still looked the same with its red brick walls, golden sign, and wooden glass doors. Everything matching the original design he had drawn himself, but Gabriel knew appearances meant nothing. What he was about to uncover inside might change everything. At 4:45 a.m., while the city of Seattle still slumbered beneath weary yellow streetlights, Gabriel stepped out of the car and observed the Rosewood Bakehouse from across the sidewalk. Everything looked just as polished as he had once envisioned it. The warm brick facade, the hand-painted sign in weathered bronze, and the glass doors coated with a thin layer of mist catching the faint golden glow from within. But what made him pause was that very light. It had been on far too early. Gabriel said nothing, simply moved closer to the large front window, where he could see straight into the open kitchen. And there, in the quiet space broken only by the soft clinking of spoons and utensils, was a woman working with a kind of hypnotic rhythm. Maya Quinn, her reddish-brown hair tied neatly high, sleeves rolled up revealing calloused skin and a long scar running across her left wrist. She moved through each batch of dough with such practiced precision it seemed thoughtless, kneading, rolling, dusting with flour, tightly folding, cleanly slicing, and gently placing each piece on the tray. Not a single distracted glance, not a wasted motion, no phone, no music. She worked as if in sacred ritual. This wasn't just technique, it was instinct. A survival instinct honed in silence. Gabriel felt his throat tighten. He had seen this before, but only in himself, many years ago when he was still an unknown baker. Exactly at 5 a.m., the shop opened with a soft click of the electronic lock. A tall man, likely in his early 30s, with a name tag that read Lucas Grant, stepped out and shook his hand with a polite smile. "You must be Ethan, right? The trainee sent from corporate?" Gabriel gave a slight nod, adjusting his posture into a more deferential stance and softening his voice, just as he had practiced all week. "Yes, thank you for taking me in on such short notice." Lucas nodded and led him past the empty pastry display, the gleaming tiled floor, and the rich smell of butter and cream that made Gabriel's stomach stir. "Lately, corporate's been sending people down to check on processes," Lucas muttered, half joking, half irritated. "Some kind of experience synchronization thing, though I've yet to see one of them tell fresh yeast from baking powder." Gabriel only smiled, because that very phrase had been his own idea. As they passed by the kitchen, Maya never looked up. Lucas lowered his voice as if entering a sanctuary. "That's Maya. She handles the morning's artisan bread. Been here longer than I have. Doesn't talk much. Doesn't like anyone near her table." Gabriel didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the movement of Maya's hands, and in that moment he realized, if bread was an art form, then Maya was the painter whose name everyone ignored in the corner of the canvas. The morning drifted by in a haze of warm butter and baked cinnamon. Gabriel, under the guise of Ethan, played the role of the obedient trainee, listening closely as Lucas explained how to restock ingredients, operate the industrial ovens, and clean the prep area. But in his mind, all of his focus was fixed on one person alone, Maya Quinn. She never looked up, never spoke, never paused even for a minute. With each tray of pastries placed in the oven, a new batch was already being shaped, filled, and lined up. The morning buns, Rosewood's signature pastry, emerged golden and tight, their caramelized sugar catching the light with a gentle sheen, as if wrapped in a sweet mist. By 7 a.m., a line of customers stretched around the corner. An older woman entered without glancing at the menu and asked immediately, "Any of Maya's pastries left today?" A younger man bought 2 boxes and added, "Please pack separately the ones she usually makes. My wife's pregnant, can't have cinnamon." Gabriel stood still for a moment, taken aback. Not one person mentioned Rosewood Bakehouse as a brand. They mentioned Maya as a mark of trust. By nearly 9 a.m., when the crowd had begun to thin, Gabriel took the chance to stand beside Lucas and asked, "She's really good. Never wanted to be a manager?" Lucas shook his head, his expression tinged with something like sympathy. "She turns everything down. Doesn't like taking photos, doesn't want her name on any recognition board. One time she was nominated for an internal creativity award. She asked me to remove her name. Maya's the kind of person who doesn't want to be seen." Gabriel gave a slight nod, but unease stirred inside him. Someone like that, technically brilliant, clearly impacting revenue, mentioned by name by customers. Why would she avoid every opportunity to step forward? And why had she stayed in the same baker role on base pay for 8 years? At noon, during a short break, a young staff member, a college student named Ben, accidentally dropped a whole tray of unshaped dough. Maya didn't get upset. She simply crouched down beside him, picking up the usable pieces and gently said, "First rule in a kitchen is, accidents always happen." Gabriel stepped in to help, but Maya raised her hand, not looking at him, and said softly, "I've got it. You're new, so you should stay focused on the front counter." Her voice wasn't annoyed or proud, just firm. She glanced at him briefly, those calm, sharp brown eyes, then returned to the waiting dough. Gabriel stood still, not taking another step. In that moment, he understood. Maya was the kind of person used to doing everything alone, and she guarded that boundary like armor. But Gabriel also knew that sometimes, behind those hardened hands, there's a story someone has to hide in order to survive. And he was about to find out what that story was. That afternoon, the pace in the kitchen surged when a large last-minute catering order came in. 6 dozen almond morning buns due in 3 hours. Raphael, the evening shift head baker, clapped his hands and called out, "Team, let's move. Ethan, you're with Maya." Gabriel stepped up to Maya's station without a word. She didn't ask anything either. She simply slid a sheet of rolled dough toward him, speaking as her hands moved so quickly his eyes could barely follow. "Roll it like this. Twist gently, don't squeeze too tight." Gabriel pretended to fumble, his hands moving slower, prompting her to give more instruction. As she adjusted his motion, Maya's rough hand rested briefly on his, carrying the sensation of someone who had shaped thousands of batches not by machine but by feel. Her fingers bore tiny scars, old burns, and a small tattoo on her wrist, a black flame. "You've done this before," Maya said suddenly, her eyes halting on the motion that had become too smooth. He gave a soft smile, brushing it off. "Maybe I just have a knack for it." Maya didn't reply, but Gabriel knew she was taking note. The entire afternoon he couldn't stop thinking about that one detail, the flame on her wrist, and the flicker of suspicion in her eyes. When the shop closed just before 6 p.m., staff began heading out, but Gabriel lingered near the storage area, pretending to clean. Maya was now tidying up alone, dragging a 50-pound sack of flour across the kitchen. Raphael called out, "Maya, leave it. Split it in half." She shook her head. "It's fine. I'm used to it." Gabriel watched her crouch down to scrub the floor by hand, quietly, methodically, as if someone were watching, but no one was. When the last light outside clicked off, Maya removed her apron, washed her hands, and left straight through the back door without changing. She didn't call a ride, didn't check her phone. Gabriel followed from a distance. Maya stopped beside an old bicycle chained to a lamppost, strapped a small backpack to the rear rack, checked the tires, and pedaled off into the night. No taxi, no bus. Just her hair loose in the wind and her figure slowly fading under the scattered glow of street lamps. That night, Gabriel sat silently in the motel room, his laptop open to the company's internal system. He searched for Maya Quinn's profile. Artisan-level employee, joined 8 years ago, performance consistently marked excellent, multiple recorded refusals of promotions and raises. But what struck him was a small line under the salary section, recurring deduction, Lindholm Capital. Gabriel leaned back, staring at the ceiling. No one refuses every benefit for 8 years unless they're bound by something larger than ambition. And he knew that reason wasn't in her employee file. It lay in a debt, and possibly a death. On the morning of the 3rd day, Gabriel arrived at the bakery at 4:50 a.m., still the second to show up. Maya was already there, carefully measuring flour and yeast like an old-world alchemist. He greeted her, and she gave a slight nod, her eyes never leaving the digital scale. The entire kitchen was wrapped in a soft light and an eerie silence, as if every sound had been muffled by the flour in the air. While organizing the ingredients, Gabriel closely observed Maya's demeanor. The shadows under her eyes were darker, her back slightly hunched, and the movements that were once fluid had begun to stiffen. Yet she never complained, never once asked for a break. By mid-morning, while others were taking inventory, Gabriel took the opportunity to excuse himself under the pretense of needing to check inventory transfer procedures, and headed to another Rosewood location on the north side of the city, managed by a veteran named Caroline Watkins, who had been with the company for 10 years. Using the alias Ethan Hale, he casually inquired about long-standing employees to study key staff retention. The moment he mentioned Maya's name, Caroline's expression softened. Her tone grew reflective. "Maya Quinn? I remember clearly the day she first walked into the store, her hands still covered in ash." Gabriel gave a light nod, prompting gently, "I heard she used to run her own bakery." Caroline sighed, her gaze distant. Yes, with her brother, Julian. They had a small shop called Quinn and Crumb in the Old Quarter. Julian handled the finances. Maya baked. Their sourdough was famous. I even went there once to buy some. But then the financial crash hit. They had been approved for a loan to expand, but the bank went under at the last minute, so Julian had to turn to another lender, Lindholm Capital. At that, Gabriel's hand clenched slightly. Caroline continued, "Unfortunately, the new oven they installed had an electrical fault and caused a fire. Insurance wouldn't cover it because the fire permit paperwork wasn't finalized. A month later, Julian crashed his car into a divider on I-5. No one survived." On the drive back, Gabriel reopened the company's internal system and dug into the archive of old product proposals. After sifting through dozens of forgotten folders, he found a plain PDF file submitted 8 years ago. The sender, Julian Quinn. Title, Heritage Sourdough, adapted from grandfather's recipe for commercial scale. Gabriel opened it. Detailed instructions, flour ratios, fermentation time, hydration levels, oven temperatures. Each figure leapt out like memories he knew by heart. Because this was the exact formula now used for the Heritage line, the company's second most profitable product. And Julian? Officially marked as not aligned with brand direction. Gabriel sat frozen for a long time. That formula hadn't been rejected. It had been stolen. And the person credited as the master creator was still celebrated, while the one who actually wrote it was dead, leaving behind a debt that had buried his sister in 8 years of relentless baking. On the early morning of the 4th day, Gabriel arrived earlier than ever. At 4:15 a.m., the Seattle sky still wore its quiet, ash-gray veil. But unsurprisingly, Maya was already there. She was measuring the water ratio, her hands moving as if the entire world had been reduced to numbers and the slowly rising dough in an old ceramic bowl. "You're early," she said without looking up. Gabriel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I couldn't sleep." He was about to walk past, but paused. "This might be a bit personal, but the flame tattoo on your wrist, does it mean something?" The question made Maya's hand freeze in midair. A flicker of pain crossed her face, then faded, like dust carefully brushed away over the years. "It's to remember something I lost," she said, then went back to kneading. Gabriel spoke slowly, his voice softening. "A bakery, Quinn and Crumb, in the Old Quarter." The clinking of metal utensils stopped. Maya slowly looked up, her eyes locked on him. The rolling pin in her hand slipped and fell to the table's edge with a dry, jarring thud. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. Gabriel remained silent for a few seconds. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a paper that had been folded many times, and carefully laid it on the flour-dusted table. 8 years ago, Julian Quinn submitted this proposal to Rosewood Bakehouse. The sourdough formula, the ratios, the techniques, and the ingredients match exactly with the current heritage line of the company. Maya stared at the printout. The familiar handwriting, her brother's neat cursive, stood clearly on the page. The formulas they had tested together for years, now in the hands of a stranger. How did you get this?" Her voice cracked. Gabriel drew a deep breath, and for the first time in 4 days, he dropped the disguise. "I'm not Ethan Hale. I'm Gabriel Stone, the current CEO of Rosewood Bakehouse, and I came here to understand why the Seattle store, the one with the best product, the most dedicated staff, was slipping financially. But what I uncovered was far beyond what I expected." Maya took a step back, her hand clutching the edge of the table as if without something to hold on to, she would collapse. "No. Julian got a rejection letter. He thought he failed. That's why he..." Gabriel nodded slowly. "I know. And I've also discovered that the person behind the theft was Connor Voss, the former VP of Product Development, who received nearly $300,000 in bonuses for an internal innovation. But the formula wasn't his." She didn't respond. She simply sank into a chair, her eyes wide but vacant. A woman who had spent 8 years working in silence, repaying a debt she believed was the result of her brother's failure, was now faced with a truth even more devastating. It hadn't been a failure, it had been a theft in plain sight, and no one had stood up for them. Until now. At 6:55 a.m., as the early shift staff stepped into the kitchen with steaming cups of coffee in hand, no one noticed that the quiet trainee of the past 4 days was standing beside Maya with a completely different presence. Gabriel Stone had reclaimed the bearing of a leader, his gaze steady, his posture straight as steel. Only Maya truly understood what was about to happen. And when Lucas, the morning shift lead, entered the kitchen and greeted Ethan as usual, Gabriel turned to face him directly. "I need you to call Monica Fields, the store manager, and have her come in immediately. Then contact regional operations and request an emergency meeting at 9 a.m. Lucas blinked, startled, stammering, "Wait, who are you?" Gabriel replied firmly, "Gabriel Stone, and I'm not waiting." 30 minutes later, in the small meeting room behind the bakery, 6 people sat around the table. Members of the regional management team, a few joining via video from other branches, and Monica, whose expression looked as if someone had just punched the air from her chest. Maya sat next to Gabriel, silent, her hands still marked with traces of flour she hadn't had time to wash off, but her eyes shone with quiet resolve. Gabriel stood, turned on the projector, and the first slide appeared with the title, "Intellectual Property Violation, Heritage Sourdough Product Line." 8 years ago, he began, a sourdough recipe was submitted to the internal system of Rosewood Bakehouse by a local baker named Julian Quinn. On paper, the proposal was rejected, but in reality, it was copied and rolled into mass production 6 months later, becoming the company's second highest profit margin product. He clicked to the next slide, displaying a side-by-side comparison of the two formulas. One, Julian's original document, and the other, the current commercial recipe, identical to the gram. The soft rustling of papers followed. No one could refute it. He continued, "The person who implemented the recipe was Mr. Connor Voss, then Vice President of Product Development, who received nearly $300,000 in bonuses for this innovation. He left the company 5 years ago due to another ethical violation, but this matter was never investigated." Evelyn Granger, chair of the board, appeared on the Zoom screen, her face ice cold. "This is entirely beyond your authority. Internal investigation, retroactive to 8 years ago, impersonating staff. Gabriel, you're overstepping." But Gabriel stood his ground. He looked straight into the camera. "What's over the line is letting a woman work tirelessly for 8 years, refusing every promotion, to pay off a debt tied to a recipe this company stole from her family. What's unjust is that we have thrived off a product tied to someone's death, yet none of you have ever asked where that recipe came from." The room fell utterly silent, and Maya, still seated, hands clasped together, eyes unwavering, waited for the moment when the truth would finally be seen, no longer buried beneath the sweet, polished sugar coating of a brand. In the thick silence of the meeting room, where no one bothered to pretend flipping papers or taking notes anymore, it was Maya who broke the stillness. She didn't stand, didn't raise her voice. She simply lifted her head and began to speak, her tone low and steady, each word shaped carefully by both pain and pride. "For the past 8 years, I've come here before sunrise. I've worked through the holidays, through New Year's, through Thanksgiving. I've turned down bonuses, refused to appear in promotional photos, never attended company gatherings. I stayed behind the oven, doing my part, because I believed it was the only way to hold on to the last piece of my brother." She looked directly at the screen where the senior executives were watching. "I stayed silent because I thought I had no right to speak. Because of the debt he left behind, I believed it was a fair punishment for a failed dream. But today, I understand. It wasn't a failure. It was theft." Her voice didn't rise, but it held the entire room still. "I don't want millions. I only want one thing, that my brother's name, Julian Quinn, be acknowledged in the place and manner it deserves. And I want this company to stop treating ideas as invisible, as default assets, simply because their creators don't have the voice to defend them." Gabriel watched her quietly. Other board members lowered their eyes. Even Stephen Lang, the CFO, who had been strongly opposed at first, said nothing more. Evelyn Granger, the woman who had long embodied the cold authority of the corporation, finally spoke after a long pause. "Miss Quinn, the board will need 30 minutes to deliberate in private." Maya nodded without hesitation. When the Zoom screen turned off, the room fell into silence. Gabriel turned to her. "You all right?" Maya took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I've said everything I needed to." 35 minutes later, the call resumed. Evelyn's face reappeared, still composed, but her eyes were no longer cold. After reviewing the evidence and cross-checking internal documents, the board agrees with the assessment that the Heritage Sourdough formula originated from the proposal submitted by Julian Quinn. The use of this formula without compensation or attribution constitutes a violation of creative ethics and intellectual property standards. She paused, then continued, "Therefore, Rosewood Bakehouse will immediately pay off Maya Quinn's outstanding debt with Lindholm Capital. We will also issue a formal acknowledgement naming Julian Quinn as the original creator of the recipe and update all packaging, marketing materials, and in-store displays accordingly." Gabriel remained silent, his fist subtly tightening under the table. Evelyn concluded, "In addition, Maya Quinn will be appointed Director of Artisan Product Development, with full operational authority, profit-sharing rights, and equitable compensation effective immediately, retroactive to the product line's launch date." Maya didn't react right away. She blinked, bowed her head slightly, and whispered, "He won't be forgotten anymore." For the first time in 8 years, Julian's name, and the values he once held so dear, were finally seen, no longer hidden in the shadows, no longer erased. 3 weeks later, Rosewood Bakehouse in downtown Seattle still looked just as familiar. The gentle hum of ovens every morning, the scent of cinnamon and butter melting into the city's damp chill, and the long line of regulars stretching down the cobbled sidewalk. But for those who paid attention, there was a small yet profound change. Just beside the entrance, above the display for new products, was a small bronze plaque engraved with the words, "In memory of Julian Quinn, the creator of the recipe that helped lay the foundation of Rosewood, a true artisan, never forgotten." Maya passed by that plaque every morning without stopping, but her back stood straighter now, her steps lighter, and her eyes no longer looked away. She still clocked in at 5 a.m., still shaped dough with calloused hands, but now she also trained 2 new apprentices, sat with the legal team to review product proposals, and sometimes paused for a few quiet minutes just to watch the dough rise, something she had never once allowed herself to do before. On her new apron, beneath the name Maya Quinn, were hand-stitched words, "Director of Artisan Product Development." It wasn't a title bestowed, it was a statement. Upstairs, behind the meeting room's glass wall, Gabriel Stone stood quietly watching. He had observed this same scene for several mornings now, but today it felt different. Monica, the store manager, stepped in and placed a cup of black coffee on the table. "The media's picking it up fast. The story about Julian, about her, it's being shared on creative forums, food blogs, even made a magazine cover." She paused, squinting at him. "But you didn't do all this just for Maya, did you?" Gabriel slowly shook his head. "I did this for all of us. Because I built Rosewood on one belief, that true value comes from those who create it. But when I found out the company's second most important recipe had been stolen, I realized something frightening. We had grown so big we could take someone's work without being questioned. And if that's the case, then we no longer deserve to exist." Down in the kitchen, a young apprentice struggled with folding the edges of a pastry too tightly. Maya leaned down, adjusted it gently, and whispered, "Go easy. Dough has its limits too." "Peace." As she walked away, the boy called after her, "If I come up with a good recipe, how do I make sure no one takes it?" Maya glanced back, her eyes carrying a quiet smile. "Because now," she said, "someone sees you." That night, in his private office, Gabriel opened an envelope sent from an unnamed address. Inside was the original handwritten recipe by Julian. The final version, complete with annotations, dates, and a signature. The last page carried a single line, bolded and underlined twice. Always give credit, even when no one's looking. Tucked with it was a small note. Don't forget why this matters for the next Julians. MQ. Gabriel read it over and over, then placed his hand over the paper as if to etch it into his heart. He understood clearly now. This story had never been just about a recipe. It was about a system that forced creators into silence while glorifying those who stole their work. Rosewood didn't just owe Maya a paycheck, it owed Julian a name. And it owed every true creator a promise, not of wealth, but of recognition, of dignity, and of the one thing any company worth surviving must uphold: justice. From a professional perspective, the true credibility of a company does not lie in its revenue or reputation, but in how it treats the quiet individuals who have helped build its value. When effort is forgotten and truth is hidden, the loss is not just personal, it is the failure of an entire system. If you believe that rightful recognition is the foundation of any sustainable growth, then like and subscribe to help share stories that matter. And leave a comment with the words, "Respect value," if you too believe that fairness should always come first.